Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Adrian Cole was an investment strategist, a man who navigated life by assessing risk and projecting returns. His world was one of data points, of trend analysis, and the cold, hard logic of the market. He believed, with an almost religious conviction, that any system, whether it was a client's retirement fund or his own life, could be optimized. Optimized for stability and for growth. Emotion was a volatile asset, best kept to a minimum. He managed large portfolios in a glass tower overlooking Philadelphia. And he managed his existence with the same, meticulous precision. This was the framework through which he had always viewed his marriage. When he met Chloe, he was 28. She was 26. A vibrant event planner, with a laugh that seemed to fill any room she entered. To him, she was a high-yield, high-risk acquisition. His life, until then, had been a portfolio of blue-chip certainties. A stable career. A sensible savings plan. A predictable routine. Chloe was the speculative addition. The one that promised exponential returns in the form of joy, spontaneity, and a social life that didn't revolve around quarterly earnings calls. He recalled their first meeting. A gallery opening. He had been analyzing the poor lighting, the inefficient traffic flow of the attendees. She was talking to 3 different groups at once. A whirlwind of energy in a bright red dress. She brought a delightful, manageable chaos to his ordered world. He, in turn, offered her a foundation. A sense of security she confessed she'd never had. It was, in his assessment, a perfectly balanced partnership. A synergy. They married 2 years later. The ceremony was an efficient but elegant affair she planned down to the last detail. The first years, they were the bull market. They bought a beautiful stone house in a quiet, leafy suburb west of the city. A sound investment in a neighborhood with excellent schools. A forward-thinking acquisition. He provided. He protected. He planned. She decorated, entertained, and filled their silent, spacious rooms with life. From his perspective, the system was working flawlessly. The domestic portfolio was outperforming all projections. But after 8 years, the market began to turn. Subtle at first. Like a fractional drop in a stock's value that only a trained eye would notice. Chloe, now 32, began to exhibit signs of dissatisfaction. It began with frequent sighs. A new weariness in her eyes that even a full night's sleep couldn't erase. She started complaining about their routine. Calling their comfortable life stale. Is there a specific problem we can address? Adrian would ask. He'd ask during their Sunday evening weekly review, a habit he'd initiated to ensure their household ran smoothly. He approached her unhappiness as he would a flagging asset. Identify the stressor. Implement a corrective action. I don't know, Adrian, she would answer, her voice distant. It's not something you can put on a spreadsheet, I just miss excitement. He processed this data. Excitement was a vague metric. He proposed solutions. A weekend getaway to New York. Reservations at a new, highly rated restaurant downtown. He even suggested they take up a hobby together. Like tennis. She would agree. And for a short while, her spirits would seem to lift. The asset would stabilize. But inevitably, the downturn would resume. Often steeper than before. He believed her when she said it was just a phase. A temporary market correction that would pass. He was a long-term investor, after all. Patience was his greatest professional virtue. But it didn't pass. On the contrary. The dividends of happiness stopped paying out altogether. The decline accelerated. Chloe's complaints grew more specific. Targeting the very foundations of the life he had so carefully constructed. His business trips, once a normal and necessary part of his career, became a point of contention. They were usually short. 2 or 3 days at most, to meet with clients in Boston or Chicago. Now, they were framed as acts of abandonment. You're always gone, she'd say, her arms crossed. I'm so lonely in this huge house. He found this illogical. She had friends. She had her work. Statistically, he was home more than many men in his profession. Worried, Adrian tried to rebalance the portfolio. When he returned from trips, he brought gifts. A designer scarf. expensive perfume. He planned special dinners. He suggested, in a calm and measured tone, that they see a marriage counselor, a third-party consultant to help them identify and resolve their systemic issues. "Don't be ridiculous," she snapped. Her reaction sharper than he'd anticipated. "We don't need that. It's an overreaction." So, he proposed more concrete changes himself. He would reduce his work travel by 10% for the next quarter. He would schedule a mandatory surprise date night every 2 weeks. He presented these as actionable steps. A clear strategy for recovery. Chloe accepted some of his ideas. A brief uptick in the market, but soon the familiar pattern of distant, cold behavior returned. She became irritated for reasons he could not identify. A volatility he could no longer predict. And every time he tried to initiate a serious discussion, to analyze the data and find a root cause, she would retreat behind a wall of promises. They were always the same. A cyclical, and ultimately meaningless, mantra. "I promise I'll do better. You're right, I understand now. This time, it'll be different." For 10 whole months, he logged those promises in his mind. And for 10 months, he chose to believe them. Adrian, above all, was a man who believed in systems. He believed that with enough effort, and the correct inputs, any system could be fixed. A marriage was no different. He viewed her promises as letters of intent. Commitments to a joint recovery plan. He just needed to keep investing his patience. But there was a critical piece of market data he didn't have. While he was trying to salvage their joint venture, Chloe had already opened a secret, competing account. Months earlier, a man from her past had reappeared. His name was Reese. A freelance photographer she had known in college. The reconnection happened through social media. She mentioned it to Adrian in passing, lumping Reese in with a few other old friends she'd been chatting with. "Nothing important," she had said. "En insignifiant data point." But the conversations with Reese grew more frequent. They started with innocent messages, which Adrian occasionally saw notifications for on her phone. Then came phone calls she would take in another room. Or out on the patio. When Adrian asked who it was, she would say, "Just a client, or my sister." He had no logical reason to doubt her. Distrust was an inefficient emotion. The calls turned into meetings. A coffee. Then a lunch. Then more frequent meetings. Without Adrian's knowledge, Chloe began constructing a parallel life. One fueled by the illusion of the excitement she claimed was missing from her marriage. This hidden variable was about to cause a catastrophic system failure. The catalyst was a routine business trip to Boston. It was a short trip, just 3 days, but essential for a major client. The night before he left, he packed his suitcase with his usual efficiency, reviewed his presentation, and just before going to bed, realized he'd left his laptop charger at the office. A minor logistical error. He made a mental note to swing by his downtown office on the way to the airport in the morning. But in the rush of an early departure, navigating traffic, a call from a junior analyst, he forgot. He didn't realize his mistake until he was in his hotel room in Boston, unpacking his briefcase. The battery icon on his screen showed a worrying 21%. Without the charger, he couldn't properly work. It was an unacceptable operational failure. He called Chloe to ask if she could overnight it to him. He called once. The call went to voicemail. He waited 5 minutes. And called again. Voicemail. A third time, 10 minutes later. Still nothing. A flicker of irritation gave way to a cold nod of concern. It was mid-afternoon, she should have been available. Adrian considered his options. He needed that charger. He called Harrison, his neighbor from 2 houses down. Harrison was a retired history professor, a quiet, dependable man. For emergencies like this, Adrian had left a spare key with him. He explained the situation. His tone professional and direct. He asked Harrison if he would be so kind as to go into the house, find the charger in the office upstairs, and take it to a shipping center. Harrison agreed without hesitation. "Not a problem at all, Adrian. Happy to help." Harrison retrieved the key, walked the short distance to Adrian and Chloe's house, and let himself in. The house was silent. He went upstairs to the office. A room Adrian kept as neat as his spreadsheets. But as he approached the door, he noticed something was wrong. The door, which was never closed, was shut. He turned the knob. It was locked. From the inside, he heard something Muffled voices. Then, a soft laugh. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable in the silent house. Suspicious, he knocked on the door. Chloe? Silence. He knocked again. Harder this time. Chloe, it's Harrison. Adrian asked me to come get his laptop charger. A few seconds passed. Then, he heard a faint shuffling sound, before the lock clicked. The door opened slowly. Chloe appeared. Looking visibly flustered. She was wearing only a silk robe, tied loosely at the waist. Her hair was a mess, and her face was flushed. And behind her, attempting to shrink behind a large bookshelf, was a man. Harrison, an unwilling witness, saw him clearly. Estwanga. Barefoot. Clutching a shirt in his hands. Harrison froze. Chloe tried to force a natural smile. A catastrophic failure of composure. The scene was too obvious to be explained away. Harrison, she stammered, pulling her robe tighter. He's a friend. We were just talking. Harrison did not respond. The professor of history, a man who understood cause and effect, simply looked from her to the man, and back again. He shook his head slowly. A gesture of profound disappointment. He stepped past her into the office. Spotted the charger on the desk, picked it up, and walked out without another word. Closing the front door firmly behind him. Once home, he picked up his phone and dialed Adrian's number. His voice, usually so calm and academic, trembled with a barely contained anger. Adrian, he began. I am sorry. I truly hate to be the one to tell you this, but you need to know what I just saw. Adrian listened. In absolute silence. Sitting on the edge of his hotel bed, the phone pressed hard against his ear. His heart was hammering against his ribs, a frantic, disorderly rhythm. When Harrison finished his quiet, devastating account, Adrian thanked him in a low, steady voice, hung up, and sat there. Frozen. His first reaction was denial. A data error. A misinterpretation. Chloe wouldn't do that. But as the minutes ticked by, the pieces began to fit. The constant complaints. The coldness. The secret phone calls. The sudden lunches with friends. It all made sense now. The sporadic, unpredictable volatility in the asset was not random market noise. It was insider trading. It was fraud. Adrian Cole did not sleep that night. He spent hours staring at the ceiling, his mind replaying every detail, every conversation, every lie from the past 10 months. And at dawn, he made a decision. He would not confront her over the phone. He would not yell, or beg. He would handle this the way he handled a catastrophic market collapse. With cold, ruthless precision. He would liquidate the asset. The strategist in Adrian took over. Emotion was a liability in a crisis. It led to poor decisions. He spent the first hour after dawn planning each step with chilling clarity. First, he handled his professional obligations. He called his junior analyst, delegated his remaining meetings, and cited a sudden family emergency. He was calm and authoritative, leaving no room for questions. Then, he booked the first available flight back to Philadelphia. During the flight, he didn't watch a movie. Or read. He mentally drafted a checklist. He knew he couldn't act on Harrison's testimony alone. He needed his own evidence. Hard data that left no room for Chloe's predictable denials. Or her emotional manipulation. She was skilled at twisting narratives. At making him doubt his own perceptions. This time, he would give her no narrative to twist. He would present only facts. He landed in Philadelphia in the middle of the afternoon. He took a car service home, arriving at the quiet suburban street in the dead of night. Chloe's car was in the driveway. He let himself in with his key. His movements silent. Deliberate. He left his suitcase in the foyer, and went straight to the office. There, he began his search. The evidence was insultingly obvious. A half-empty bottle of expensive wine on the side table. A brand he never bought. 2 glasses. With lipstick stains on one, and the residue of red wine in both. And on the armchair in the corner, a man's leather jacket. It wasn't his. He took out his phone. And he began documenting everything. He photographed the scene from multiple angles, capturing every detail like a forensic investigator. The wine bottle. The glasses. The jacket. He opened drawers, checked the wastebasket, looking for anything else. He didn't find much more. But what he had, was sufficient. It was a complete, undeniable dataset of betrayal. Then, he went to their bedroom. He stood in the doorway and watched Chloe sleep. For a moment, a flicker of something, a memory of the woman he had loved, the partner in his life's project, caused a sharp pang in his chest. It was quickly replaced by a cold, clarifying anger. Anger for being deceived. Anger for investing so much in a fraudulent enterprise. He took a deep breath, backed out of the room, and spent the rest of the night on the living room couch, finalizing his liquidation plan. The next morning, he woke her as usual. She came downstairs, her face a mask of surprise at seeing him home early. She tried to act normally, asking how his trip was. It was cut short, he said, his voice flat. He made coffee. Poured them both a cup. And when she sat down at the kitchen island, he looked at her directly. His expression was a complete blank. "We need to talk," he said. His tone calm, but firm. "Tonight. When I get back from work." Chloe's hand trembled. Her cup clattered against the marble countertop. "Talk? Talk about what?" He held her gaze for 3 long seconds. "You know what." And then he turned. And left. Leaving her alone with the weight of those 3 words. All day, Chloe descended into a panic. She called his cell phone a dozen times. Sent a flood of text messages. He ignored every single one. She didn't know how much he knew. Only that he knew something. She called Reese, desperate. She told him she thought Adrian had found out. Reese, displaying the risk-averse nature of a man with no real investment, panicked. He told her he didn't want any trouble. That she needed to handle it on her own. Then he hung up. In that moment, Chloe realized her new, exciting asset had just declared bankruptcy. She was completely alone. Meanwhile, Adrian wasn't at work. He was in a quiet, wood-paneled office downtown. Meeting with a divorce attorney. He laid out the situation with the dispassionate clarity of a quarterly report. He told the lawyer everything, showed him the photographs on his phone, and explained the timeline of Chloe's behavior. The lawyer, a sharp man named Mr. Davies, listened carefully. "The house is in your name?" "Solely," Adrian confirmed. "Any children?" "No. In Pennsylvania, infidelity doesn't directly affect the division of assets," Mr. Davies explained. "However, this clear evidence of broken trust can certainly strengthen your position and expedite the process. It paints a very clear picture." Adrian signed the necessary papers, authorizing the start of the proceedings. He then made a final request. He asked Mr. Davies to accompany him home that evening. For the confrontation, the lawyer, sensing the need for a non-emotional third party, agreed. The stage was set. When Adrian came home that evening, he was not alone. Mr. Davies, carrying a leather briefcase, walked in behind him. Vanessa, who had clearly been waiting anxiously, saw them enter. Her face went pale. She tried to force a smile, tried to ask who the other man was, but her voice failed her. "Sit down, Chloe," Adrian said. It was not a request. She obeyed. Sinking onto the living room sofa as if her legs could no longer support her. She was trembling. Then, in a calm, chilling voice, Adrian began to speak. He stood before her, the lawyer, a silent, imposing figure by his side. "For 10 months, Chloe. I listened to you say you would change. That this time, it would be different. That you understood what I was asking for. I believed you. I gave you space, I gave you time, and I gave you my patience. I tried everything to fix what I thought was a problem with us." He paused. "And you betrayed me." Chloe tried to interrupt. To deny it, her voice was a desperate whisper. "Adrian, it's a misunderstanding. Nothing happened. That man in the office. He was just a friend." Adrian raised a hand. A gesture that cut her off instantly. "Don't." Then he reached into his jacket, pulled out a small stack of glossy photographs he'd had printed that afternoon, and placed them on the coffee table in front of her. The wine bottle. The 2 glasses. The man's jacket on the armchair. Chloe stared at the images. A sob escaped her lips. She started to cry. "Adrian, I can explain." "There's no need," he cut her off again, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Harrison told me everything. He saw you, Chloe. He saw the man in the office. And before you try to deny that, or twist the story, I also have this." Adrian opened his own laptop, which was already on the table, and turned it to face her. On the screen was a series of photos. Harrison, on his own initiative, had taken several clear pictures with his phone through the office doorway to protect Adrian. The images were damning. Chloe in her robe. And the man Reese clearly visible behind her. There was no room for doubt. Chloe broke down completely. She covered her face with her hands and began sobbing, muttering incoherent apologies. Adrian remained impassive. An executioner watching a sentence being carried out. "This is Mr. Davies," he continued, gesturing to the lawyer. "He will be handling our divorce. The papers are already drawn up. As you know, this house is in my name. You have 1 week to move your personal belongings out." Chloe looked up, her face streaked with tears, her eyes red and pleading. She tried to appeal to their shared history. "Adrian, please, don't do this. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. But we can fix this. We have 8 years together. 8 years. You can't just throw it all away." He took a deep breath and crossed his arms, his posture unyielding. His voice was steady, but without anger. "I'm not throwing anything away, Chloe. You already did that. I'm just closing the position. And for you to stand there and talk about our marriage after what you did, after I gave you everything you ever asked for. Don't tell me I'm being unfair." Mr. Davies, who had been silent until then, finally spoke. His tone professional, and final. "Mrs. Cole, I strongly suggest you find your own legal representation. The process will begin tomorrow morning. Any and all future communication should go through your respective attorneys." Chloe tried to protest again, but Adrian was already standing, signaling the end of the conversation. She reached for his arm, a final, desperate gesture. He stepped back. Out of her reach. "Don't touch me." The coldness in his voice was absolute. In the following days, Chloe tried everything. She sent desperate messages. She showed up at his office, but he had already informed security not to let her in. He blocked her number. She called her mother, hoping for an ally, but it backfired. Her mother, a woman with a strict moral code, was horrified. She called Adrian to apologize on her daughter's behalf, making it clear she did not condone Chloe's actions. Her father temporarily cut off contact, saying she had brought shame on their family. And Reese, the catalyst for it all, vanished. He blocked Chloe on all social media, changed his number, and disappeared from her life as quickly as he had entered it. Chloe, who had risked everything for a fantasy of excitement, realized too late that she had never been more than a passing amusement to him. He had taken advantage of an opportunity, with no intention of ever accepting the liability. Adrian moved forward with determination. He immersed himself in his work, focusing on complex market analyses that demanded his full attention. The pain was there, a deep, structural damage to his psyche, but he compartmentalized it. He treated it like a bad investment he had already written off. The loss was painful, but it would not be allowed to bankrupt his entire emotional portfolio. There were nights when the silence of the large house felt suffocating, nights when he questioned his own rigidity, wondering if he should have given her another chance. But whenever those doubts surfaced, he would access the data file in his mind. The image of Chloe in her robe. The man hiding in his office. The 10 months of lies. And then the doubt would vanish. The data was conclusive. The divorce process was swift. With no children and the primary asset the house in his name, there was little for Chloe to contest. She tried, at her lawyer's urging, to argue for a more favorable division, but the evidence of her affair, while not legally binding for asset division, created a narrative of bad faith that the judge could not ignore. The court granted a minimal equitable division. Malcolm kept the house and the majority of his assets. Chloe left with little more than what she had brought into the marriage 8 years prior. Months later, officially divorced, Adrian started to rebuild. He wasn't trying to replace Chloe. He was rebalancing his life according to his own terms. He discovered he was more resilient than he had thought. The pain of betrayal had been intense, but it did not have to define him. He made a conscious, strategic decision not to become bitter or distrustful. He would learn from this market crash, adjust his risk parameters, and move on. About a year after the divorce, Adrian was in a local supermarket on a Saturday afternoon. He was pushing his cart down an aisle, mentally checking off his grocery list, when he heard a voice that was both familiar and foreign. He turned. A few feet away, stood Chloe. She looked profoundly different. She was thinner, and her face, once so vibrant, looked tired. She was wearing simple clothes that lacked her usual flair. She was holding a small grocery basket, and she walked with a slowness that suggested a great weight on her shoulders. Their eyes met. For a moment, time seemed to stop. She hesitated, then took a tentative step toward him. Adrian didn't move away. He just waited, his expression neutral. When she reached him, she attempted a weak, sad smile. "Hi, Adrian." He gave a small, polite nod. "Chloe, you look good," she said, her voice quiet. "I'm doing well," he replied, his tone even. "I hope you are too." A heavy silence hung between them, filled with everything left unsaid. Chloe took a breath, clearly wanting to say more. Perhaps to apologize again. Perhaps to test the waters of a door he had long since bolted shut. But Adrian didn't give her the space. Not out of cruelty, but out of a rigid sense of self-preservation. He had made peace with the past. He had no interest in reopening a closed account. "Good to see you," he said with a small nod of finality. He then turned and pushed his cart toward the checkout aisle, leaving her standing alone among the shelves of pasta and canned sauces. She stood there, watching him go. And in that moment, she must have felt the full, crushing weight of her losses. Not just Adrian, but the life they had built, the respect of her family, the illusion of a passionate affair. It had all been liquidated. Destroyed by choices that now revealed themselves for what they were. Selfish, cowardly, and foolish. Adrian, meanwhile, felt an odd sense of peace as he loaded his groceries into his car. There was no anger. No desire for revenge. There was only the calm certainty that he had made the correct, logical choice. He had recognized that when someone repeatedly breaks your trust, when they choose betrayal over partnership, there is no fixing the system. Moving on, no matter how painful, is the only way to preserve your own capital. His life continued to improve. He received a major promotion at work. He started going to the gym regularly and reconnected with old friends. Life after Chloe wasn't an ending. It was a market correction that had led to a new, more stable period of growth. Almost 2 years after the divorce, he was at a restaurant downtown with friends when he saw her again. She walked in with another woman. She didn't see him at first, but when she did, her face fell. Adrian, however, didn't react. He kept laughing and talking with his friends. There was no pain left. No bitterness. There was only indifference. As he left the restaurant, he walked past her table. She looked up at him, perhaps expecting a nod, a word. He met her gaze for a fraction of a second, and walked on by. As if she were a complete stranger. And in a way, that's exactly what she had become. A failed investment. A historical data point in a portfolio that was now, once again, performing exceptionally well. The lesson Adrian learned was clear. And final. Trusting people was necessary, but blind trust was a fool's strategy. He had given Chloe every opportunity. He had been patient, understanding, and willing to reinvest. But she chose the easy path. The one of lies and empty promises. And in doing so, she lost everything. He never regretted how he handled it. He didn't make a scene. He simply faced the truth, executed a plan, and moved on. He had proven to himself that real strength wasn't in holding on to a depreciating asset. It was in having the courage to cut your losses. Because in the end, some promises are meant to be broken. And when that happens again and again, the only dignified response is to turn the page and start a new chapter, without ever looking back. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next.